So far today we've been looking at angles that are from 0 to 90 degrees, but we need to be able to look at angles that are from 90 degrees and bigger, so they can be any size whatsoever. They could be 150 degrees, they could be 290 degrees, they could be 1000 degrees, they could be any angle size. The way we approach that is by first of all having a look at a set of axes. Now on these axes we start with 0 degrees here, then 90 degrees, 180 degrees, 270 degrees, and finally we finish at 360 degrees. You'll see that this divides the plane up into 4 quadrants. The first quadrant is from 0 to 90 degrees. The second quadrant is from 90 to 180 degrees. The third quadrant is 180 to 270 degrees. And the fourth quadrant is from 270 to 360 degrees. And angles are measured in an anti-clockwise direction, so if we measure in the anti-clockwise direction, the angles are positive. If we measure in the clockwise direction, the angles are measured and considered to be negative angles. Alright, now we need to look a little more closely at what happens with these 4 quadrants and how we measure the angles and how we apply the trigonometric ratios to the angles in each quadrant. When we want to measure an angle, we always measure the angle from the horizontal. So in the first quadrant, we have this angle theta. It's in the first quadrant. If we wanted to measure the same angle with respect to each trig ratio in the second quadrant, we measure the angle upwards from the horizontal. So this angle is actually considered to be 180 minus theta degrees. If we wanted to measure the angle in the third quadrant, then we measure downwards from the horizontal into the third quadrant. This angle is considered to be 180 plus theta degrees. And if we want to measure the angle that's in the fourth quadrant, we measure downwards again from the horizontal, but now we're measuring from a full revolution, so it'll be 360 minus theta degrees. The important thing to note here is that we are always measuring in each quadrant the angle with respect to the horizontal. Now, my terminology is that this angle here in the first quadrant, I call that the characteristic angle. That's the angle that really designates what happens in each quadrant. What we also notice is that when we take the trig ratios in each of these quadrants, that in the first quadrant, all of the trig ratios are positive. So sine theta, cosine theta, and tan theta are all positive in the first quadrant. But in the second quadrant, if I've measured an angle that takes me into the second quadrant, then it's only going to be the sine ratio that will give us a positive answer. If I measure an angle that takes me into the third quadrant, then it'll only be the tangent ratio that gives me a positive answer. And if I measure an angle that will take me into the fourth quadrant, then it will only be the cosine ratio that gives me a positive answer. Now, if we look at this in a little bit more detail, we're going to see how we can apply this in some of the problems that we come across later. Because what we find is, as already stated, sine, cosine, and tan of theta is all positive in the first quadrant. To find the angles in the second quadrant, we have to go 180 degrees minus theta. And what we find is sine of 180 minus theta is equal to sine of theta. Cosine of 180 minus theta is equal to minus cosine of theta. And tan of 180 minus theta is equal to minus tan of theta. If we look at the angles that are in the third quadrant, then we need to go 180 degrees plus theta. So sine of 180 degrees plus theta is equal to minus sine of theta. Cosine of 180 degrees plus theta is equal to minus cosine of theta. And tan of 180 degrees plus theta is equal to tan of theta. And then finally, the same relationship holds true for the fourth quadrant. However, what we'll find is it's the cosine which gives us the positive answers. Sine of 360 degrees minus theta equals minus sine of theta. Cosine of 360 degrees minus theta is equal to cosine theta. And tan of 360 degrees minus theta is equal to minus tan of theta. Now, all of these relationships are things that we're going to be using and getting more experience and practice in applying in the questions that come ahead.